Welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's video. Death is something that we all must face at some point in our life. The majority of people, when asked, would tell you that they hope to go peacefully in their sleep. Unfortunately, a peaceful death is not in the cards for many people, and as you will see today, some violent deaths can push the limits on how twisted and horrific they can be. Today, we will explore two cases where not only were these young people killed in a violent fashion, but they were also chosen to die by their killers for their sinister purpose of pleasing Satan. Satanic ritual killings are by no means a new thing in humanity's story, with tales of sacrifice for Lucifer going back to the dawn of man. These two cases today are only a fraction of crimes committed in honor of some people's dark lord, Satan. Let's get into it. Corriann Cervantes. Corriann Cervantes was a 15-year-old girl that lived in Clear Lake, Texas. By all accounts, Corriann was like many of her peers at that age. She loved taking selfies, hanging out with friends, and posting about her life on Facebook. On a February night in 2014, Corriann would make a decision that would lead her to a horrific murder. That night, she went to a small party at one of her friends' house. She would go on to consume alcohol and smoke cannabis that evening, not unlike many teenagers who are experimenting with mind-altering substances at that age. Tragically, not all of the teenagers at that party were innocent. Specifically, two young men who were her classmates of Corriann at a charter school in Clear Lake, Texas, attended the party. The names of the two boys are Jose Reyes and Victor Alas. Sadly, they had much darker plans in mind, rather than teenage experimentation with drugs. Jose Reyes was a 17-year-old, extremely rebellious young man who had shown signs of worrying behavior. It has been alleged that Jose openly talked about his worship of Lucifer and that he would proudly boast that he had sold his soul in a dark pact. His room was littered with satanic imagery and dark religious artifacts that he was said to use during his ritualistic worship of the devil. Victor Alas was a 16-year-old boy that showed many of the dark characteristics that his friend Jose showed. Victor had shown great interest into the occult, and he began taking advice from Jose regarding his dark desires. Victor asked Reyes how he too could sell his soul to Satan. Jose told Victor that Satan would accept his soul if he killed someone. So from that moment on, Corriann's fate had been sealed. While at the party, Jose Reyes and Victor Alas convinced Corriann to accompany them away from her friend's party. The boys lured her into an abandoned apartment not far from where the teenagers had met up to have a good time. According to several publications, Corriann consented to having sexual relations with Reyes at this point. While the two teenagers were engaged in this consensual act, Reyes is said to have begun stabbing Cervantes. She pulled away and tried to run out of the empty apartment. The two boys then grabbed her and struck her with a toilet tank, crushing it on her skull. The two miscreants then began to stab her from head to toe with a screwdriver. One of the boys grabbed an ashtray and began bashing her with it as well. At this point, Cervantes began to beg the two thugs for her life. These two showed no mercy though. As a matter of fact, her pleas only emboldened them to torture her more. While pleading for her life, Reyes gouged one of her eyes out. They continued to beat the young woman until she stopped breathing. Several days went by before anyone knew of the fate of Corriann Cervantes. A tenant from an adjacent apartment unit found her body surrounded by the religious objects that had been placed there in a ritualistic manner. The teenager's skull was collapsed in on itself from the savage beating she had taken. When the coroner performed the autopsy, he found shards of porcelain embedded in her face. It was also at this point that it was discovered that the deranged teens had carved an upside-down cross into Corriann's abdomen. Jose Reyes is an arrogant monster. so unsurprisingly, he could not keep his mouth shut about the horrific things he and his friend had done to this innocent girl. This would lead to the police arresting Reyes, where he would confess to every horrific detail of his ritualistic killing. He told the police that Satan had told him to do this, and that Satan was there with them the entire time enjoying what the boys were doing. Both Jose Reyes and Victor Alas would be charged with capital murder. Both teenagers would be found guilty and are now serving life sentences without the chance of parole. At no point during the court proceedings did the weight of their actions ever seem to burden the teens. They appeared to actually enjoy the attention. They smiled for the cameras, and at one moment, Reyes turned and waved directly into the news cameras.
17-year-old Jose Reyes has been charged with capital murder. He smiled directly into our camera lens in court today. Another capital murder suspect is 16, a student who went to school with the victim. Police say a neighbor found Cervantes early Saturday morning.
The only thing I heard was Wednesday night at 11 o'clock was a really, really loud banging sound.
Many of the details police report are too graphic to say on television. But police say she had been sexually assaulted and had a broken toilet tank lid around her head. They also report finding an upside-down cross carved in her stomach. They say one of the suspects confessed, saying he did it so his friend could sell his soul to the devil.
Genesis Cornejo-Alvarado.
Yeah, Rachel and Owen, that's right. According to prosecutors, the two men accused of kidnapping and murdering that girl are gang members from El Salvador who perform satanic-type rituals on their female victims.
Genesis Cornejo-Alvarado was a missing persons in the state of Texas. She had been kidnapped by a group of men who were affiliated with the gang MS-13. The ringleader of this bunch was Miguel Angel Alvarez Flores, an illegal immigrant from El Salvador. Alvarez Flores was openly worshiping Satan, as most of the members of MS-13 do. It was his devil worship that led to the whereabouts of Genesis to be discovered. One day, while at the gang's apartment, Genesis began to mock the gang members' worship of Lucifer. She crushed a statue that was a depiction of Satan during her mockery of the men. Alvarez Flores was infuriated by her actions. He lit a cigarette and offered it as an offering to an effigy that he had of Satan. It was at this point that he said the beast was not interested in a sacrifice of tobacco, but instead demanded the sacrifice of a soul. At this point, Miguel Angel Alvarez Flores and fellow gang member Diego Alexander Hernandez Rivera took Genesis away from the apartment and into their car. They drove a short distance and proceeded to get out of the car on the side of the road with Cornejo-Alvarado. Diego took a gun that Alvarez Flores had and shot the defenseless Genesis in the head. Then Flores took the gun and shot her in the stomach. She died moments later. The men then fled the scene, leaving Genesis Cornejo-Alvarado dead on the side of the road. A few days later, on February 16, 2017, police discovered her corpse. If not for the bravery of a 14-year-old girl coming forward, Genesis' identity and killers may have never been discovered. The teenage girl ran away from home a few weeks earlier and was kidnapped by the same group of gang members. They held her for 2 weeks against her will, force-feeding her alcohol and drugs, all the while sexually assaulting her. The young girl remembered another young woman being held captive as well, and she told police she believed it to be Genesis Cornejo-Alvarado. Both Miguel Angel Alvarez Flores and Diego Alexander Hernandez Rivera have been indicted on murder charges for the ritualistic killing of Cornejo-Alvarado. Much like the criminals in our first case, these two men have shown zero remorse, and they themselves have played it up in front of the cameras in court by waving, smiling, and even laughing. No one knows what evil lies within the heart of man, but when examining cases like the two we have today, it can be an extremely frightening proposition. It is tragic that these young women had to face death at such a young age, but all the sadder knowing that their lives were taken to fulfill men's dark desires in satanic ritual. Thank you all so much for joining us as we explored these dark cases of ritualistic killing. We really appreciate all of your support and giving us a platform where we can bring attention to such horrific cases such as these. Please like, subscribe, share, and post a comment. Do not forget to hit that notification bell so that you never miss any of the channel's content. Until the next one.